Dennis Gillen, you founded Half a Sorry Foundation in 2020. It's a nonprofit organization. And like others who started national and international organizations in response to traumatic losses like MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Drivers, or Compassionate Friends, you turned your own loss into a purpose by empowering individuals, organizations, and communities through compassionate outreach and life-saving education. I pulled that from your website because you have a lot of good information on there, and I'm gonna make sure that when we share this video that we will have a link to that.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yeah. Look at that. I've known you for several years now, and I've looked at your website over the past several years, and you've really continued to build on that and have some wonderful resources for grief and for suicide prevention, for mental health resources, and you've got a list of all the organizations, universities, businesses that you have connections with because you've probably done presentations there. But today, I wanted to find out what led you to be so passionate about starting your organization, Half a Sorrow.
Well, that's a great question, because the passion, like you mentioned those other organizations, you know, my pain has become my misery. No, check that. My pain has become my purpose. My misery has become my mission. And yeah, my pain is my misery if you think about it. But if I've evolved to the point where I've taken some tragedies and tried to turn them into something good. And I think about, well, biblically, Joseph and his brothers. I mean, what was intended for evil, God turned into good. And I don't think what was intended for evil, what happened to me, was just, it was a traumatic events. I have to pluralize that because I lost not one but two brothers to suicide, 11 years apart. And for years I did nothing about it. I was busy raising a young family. I went into my man cave. I withdrew and I isolated. I stopped doing a lot of social stuff and just focused on a little unit that was at the house, and I withdrew. And then as time went on, it was gnawing at me. You know, I was reading about suicides. I was reading other people suffering. I'm like, eventually you get to the point like, you gotta do something. So I first initially volunteered for the Suicide Prevention Lifeline. And that was really good because that was anonymous. None of my neighbors knew it. I lived in Chicago at the time. I would go Thursday nights, answer the phones. And that number is now 988. It used to be that really long number. 800-273-TALK. Nobody can remember that. I could barely get it out now, but it's now 988. It's a short number. And if you call it, there's a trained professional volunteer on the line, and I was one of those folks. And it was awesome. So when I moved to South Carolina, I moved to Columbia, South Carolina. If you know the geography of our state, we're in Greenville now, but the call center was in Greenville. And I was in Columbia. It was an hour and a half. I couldn't do it anymore. So I got involved with the American Foundation of Suicide Prevention, started doing some work with them. And then eventually when I moved to Greenville, I started talking about my brothers. And it became this, it was weird. I spoke at a fundraiser for the first time ever for the American Foundation of Suicide Prevention when I was a board member. I spoke at this fundraiser and I sat down and I remember saying, I'm never telling that story again because it's awful. It's brutal. And this woman came up to me and she said, you need to tell that story more often. Like, we make plans and God laughs, right? So I got a call after that one, and then this woman saw me speak at this fundraiser. I said, can you come speak to my college students as psychology interns? And I bombed terribly. Then another girl called and said, hey, I heard you did a good job at USC. I'm like, who's writing my reviews? I'm doing terrible. But somewhere along the line, I hit my stride. I started to do the talk the way I wanted it done. I have ADHD, sure, probably from the traumas of my brothers. I probably had it before that. And I just wanted to talk from the heart. And one day, I was at Charleston Southern, which is a Baptist school. They prayed for me right before I went on, and I needed it because I was nervous. The room was packed. It held about 220 people, and there was 300 kids in there. They were sitting in the aisles. If the fire marshal showed up, they were going to shut it down. But it was for their convocations, it was mandatory. And this woman prayed for me. I'm like, I'm going to go for it. I'm just going to tell the story like I want. I have some slides, and I'm going to go for it. And I remember on the way back, I brought a friend of mine who happened to be a pastor. And I said, how'd it go? He goes, you got to keep going. He goes, I didn't see one kid on their phone. You've got something here. And I sort of wanted to hear that, and the other part of me didn't want to hear that. If he would have said, hey, Dennis, don't quit your day job, I would have been like, all right, I tried. And I said, no, you got to keep going. So that's where it started, speaking about it. And then in 2020, as you referenced in your intro, I decided to turn it into a foundation. A lot of people wanted to help me, and they didn't know how. A lot of people wanted to financially support me. I said, hey, can I donate? I said, I'm not set up for that. I was DennisGillen.com. I'm like, Dennis, you think much of yourself? It's not about me. It's about others. And then I heard that saying, and I was trying to think about a name for my organization, and I heard that proverb on the radio. A shared joy is a double joy. A shared sorrow is half a sorrow. And I may have heard that a million times in my life. But that one day it struck me like, oh my gosh, that's what I'm doing. I'm sharing my sorrow. I'm trying to cut it in half. It'll never go away, but that's what we want to do with this foundation. We want to cut people's sorrows in half. Yeah. How do we do that? We talk about it. We put them right out there, and you shine a light on them. So that's how it started. 2020 gave us a perfect opportunity. You said that in your intro. That was COVID.
Oh, yeah.
I wasn't doing much public speaking. I'm like, well, if I needed to do it, now would be a great time because I have time. Mm-hmm. And I just got all the ducks in a row. I got a 501c3. It's a federally tax ID number, all that good stuff. I did all the legal stuff. And then when COVID started lifting, I now have people, when they hire us to do stuff, they pay the foundation, they don't pay me. Mm-hmm. This way, there are times I can go places that can't afford me or can't pay at all. I said, don't worry about it, we'll cover it. Yeah. So that's how it works.
That's amazing. What a story. So you had 2 personal losses, and I've heard you talk about those, Dennis. How did you cope with your grief once you realized that it was overwhelming, in addition to starting to give of yourself on the as a volunteer with the Crisis Center?
Yes, the first one I didn't handle very well. I was 20 years old when Mark died, and I went on a bender, and a bender would include drugs and alcohol. And I think everybody listening to this, and you and I could both agree that that's a negative coping skill. And it was awful. And I got out of college, and 11 years later, when we lost my younger brother, Matthew, to suicide, I remember driving home. I had 4 hours between where I lived and where we buried Matthew. I remember driving home saying, man, something's got to change. And alcohol is a depressant. I was depressed. It was like trying to put a fire out with gasoline. It wouldn't work. So I decided to take a time out. So that was a good move for me. That was the first real good positive step to handling my grief was, all right, let's take substances out of the picture. Yeah. And I've been sober for 31 years. That's done. And then I went and saw a professional counselor because even sober, I was still super depressed. Sober or drunk, my brothers weren't around. So either way, but with a sober mind, I walked into a counselor's office, and that was a great move too.
How did you find a counselor?
Well, when Matthew died, I went looking for a counselor. I had access to an employee assistance program. Mm-hmm. So I used the ones they recommended because it was free. You get 8 free sessions, and then I had to pay. Now I know better that I look for someone who's trauma informed. They have to be, I don't want somebody who does adolescence. I'm not an adolescent. My behavior may be adolescent, but I'm not an adolescent. And I need someone who can handle, it's not marital, it's very complicated. It's a complicated grief, and I need someone in that arena. And they're out there. They will list. Yes. If you look for a psychologist, and that's who you go see, a psychiatrist will write medicines, and it's another level. But typically a counselor, at the psychology level, and they will list what they're good at. And I ran into mine at a grief seminar. And she told me what she did. She asked, you guys go to a grief seminar? I said, I'm going to call you. So that's how you find them.
Yeah.
You just look for someone who's lined up properly. And a good counselor, you know, it's okay. It's kind of like dating. You can break up with a counselor. You can say, that's not working. But don't give up on counseling.
Yes.
Just find the right one.
Yeah.
And that's okay. I've had really good ones. I've had, I don't want to say bad ones. I just had one I wasn't clicking with.
Yeah.
And I said, hey, this ain't going to work. I'm going to find somebody else. And he agreed, and I agreed.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that you shared initially is you touched on your faith. And I wondered if that has been a part of how you found healing as well, or if it's been challenged, a challenge to your faith, or both.
Both, all of the above.
Yeah.
And if you think about the first death with Mark, I always talked to God, but you know, sometimes it wasn't very nice. But as long as there's communication, sometimes my faith is like a steel, you know, rod, and other times it's as thin as a human hair. But there's always that connection.
Yeah.
And when Matthew died, I went hard on faith. You know, I went back into it knowing full well that I'm sober, I'm going to counseling, there's this piece that's missing. I got to get back with God. Mm-hmm. So it was a big part of my journey. And we still wrestle, like everyone. You know, you think you're back in the faith and you're doing all the right things, everything's going to be Skittles and unicorns. We're still going to have tough days. Yeah. You're still going to have them. You're just like, where do you put your hope? And that's where I put my hope. And I think it's a pretty darn good place to put my hope.
In part 2 of this interview, Dennis Gillen, the founder of Half a Sorrow Foundation, continues to share his insights on suicide prevention and grief.
To identify 3 important resources for people who may be grieving the death of a loved one, especially after suicide loss, what would those 3 resources be?
That's a great question, and there are meetings, and you got to be ready for them. We have loss meetings, and survivor of suicide loss. The terminology gets a little weird with suicide because you say, I'm a survivor of suicide. And you go, well, yeah. Did you attempt it? Like, no. That's a person with lived experience. We call those folks who attempted and are still with us. God bless them. That's lived experience. Mm-hmm. I run a meeting here locally called Survivors of Suicide Loss. Now, I've done, like at some churches, they'll do grief share or some grief classes. Yes. When I went into those grief classes, as a survivor of suicide loss, I felt out of place in a weird way. You know, everyone went around and shared their grief, and then I shared mine, and it felt like the air just got sucked out of the room because it's different. Yeah. It's a complicated grief. It comes with the woulda, coulda, shoulda baggage. So I literally started my own loss meeting. So we meet, and there's 2 of them in Greenville. I run one. Mental Health America runs one. I know there's some in Anderson. I can get you all a list. The American Foundation for Suicide Prevention has a website, and they list, you type in your zip code, and we'll show you these meetings. They're now virtual. You can do it online if you don't feel like leaving your house. I prefer in person. Yeah. I just do. So my meeting is in person. And if someone says, can you do it virtually? I can recommend virtual meetings. I need to be belly to belly, face to face with those who are going through what I went through. And we meet on the 3rd Thursday of every month, which is tonight. We have our meeting at Grace Church downtown. And then Mental Health America meets on the 2nd, I think, and 3rd Tuesday. So somebody in our area can go to 3 meetings a month. So, and we'll have that link for the folks to find it, no matter where you are. But that was a good thing. So you don't grieve alone. Do the work and let the grief do its work. And I would ask you, and no one owes me any favors, but try to do it with a sober mind. Yeah. I'm back to that. And don't do it alone. Yeah. If you are hurting, let somebody know. Mm-hmm. They're going to know anyway, but just tell them why you're.
Yeah, I hear that constant theme in sharing information about healthier grief, and through what you've shared today, that we need other people. We need support. We can't do this alone.
No way.
Dennis, on your website, you described suicide as a growing yet preventative public health crisis, and you state that it's currently the second leading cause of death among individuals between ages 20 to 34 in the U.S. Dying by suicide has a stigma, and you touched on that briefly.
Oh, yeah.
As you talked about the support group, because many times people recoil when you start talking about death by suicide, that it's affected you. Also recognizing and receiving mental health care still has some stigma. I think it's getting better, but do you think it's improving?
I do, in certain age groups. I spoke earlier this week at a college, and I have really good news. The age group 15 to 24, we're seeing suicides go down. Yay. If you're in my business, that's a big yay. What I think they're doing really good in that age group is they are talking about mental health.
Yes.
Early and often. As we get older, we're seeing numbers get worse or increasing in suicides. And that disheartens me, but I also think that's the group that's just maybe starting to get comfortable talking about it, but they haven't. Like my generation didn't talk about it. My dad's forget about it. There's no way they were talking about mental health, but we're getting better at it. I'm associated with a lot of men's group. Men are 80% of all suicides. Women have more attempts. We're in this together. So I'm seeing it lifting, but I wish it would lift the stigma. I wish the veil would lift a little faster. Because it's okay to not be okay.
Yeah. On the campuses where you go, you're invited to speak. And do they have particular resources that they recommend on college or university campuses?
A lot of universities these days are doing some fantastic work. They have the counseling and psychological services for a lot of campuses. They call them CAPS. So they have counselors. They never have enough, but there's not enough counselors coast to coast in the workforce. There's not enough of them. So I don't hold that against any university. They also have a lot of programs and programming aimed at mental health for these kids. It's when I get them out of that arena, I have trouble getting older audiences in a room.
Yes.
Your grief seminar is a good example. That's really good to get people in a room. And you get professionals and lay people. But if I did like a men's meeting and I rented out a theater, hardly anyone would show up. So I start going to groups like at churches, men's groups there and all that stuff. But even the declining attendance there, it's post-COVID, it's hard to get people together. Yeah. This period. You may notice in some of the stuff you're doing.
Oh, definitely.
It's hard to get people out.
Yes.
I don't know what happened. Well, I know we're inside and we kind of liked it and we got distracted with all these other screens. But I did an event here in Greenville called It's a Tough Subject, and that's the name of our podcast. And we have a podcast about this, but we did a live show. Boy, it was like pulling teeth to get people to come out. We sold 155 tickets. I was happy with that, but man, oh man, it was a lot of work. The theater held 220. I wanted to sell 220 tickets, but it's just hard to get people to come out anymore. And we need to change that because we are designed to do things in community.
Yeah, that's so true. I've seen a good bit of decline. I hope to see an incline in responses to the grief resources that we offer or that other organizations like yours offer, because there is something about being there in person. It's wonderful to be able to do it digitally, but there's a difference in that physical presence.
And it's needed.
How can we work to change the stigma around suicide, grief, and loss, and getting mental health care for ourselves when we need it?
The first thing we can do is talk about suicide. The years have gotten by. I remember being old enough to, people wouldn't talk about cancer. If somebody had cancer, they'd say it real low. Oh, she has cancer. And they would their voice would go down. We got to get really comfortable talking about suicide and then go upstream and talk about mental health. Suicide's often it's the most fatal symptom. We know that someone's suffering from a mental health situation. So let's go upstream and talk about mental health. How are you doing really? Questions like that. The stigma around suicide is starting to lift. I've seen recently, in the business you're in, I've seen some obituaries written that address it.
Yes.
And it's really comforting. I'm still super sad about the loss, but the people are saying, listen, this person lost their battle with depression, and you know exactly what happened.
Yes.
And you feel for them. And it used to be years gone by, just like, my brother Mark Gillen, age 20, went to go be with the Lord. Well, what happened? You're sitting there guessing, and then they pick a charity. We picked a charity that had nothing to do with mental health, because I don't know if we want anyone to know.
Yeah.
So I've seen a real shift in that.
Yeah.
And still a celebration of life, and they'll come right at it and say, listen, he battled depression for years, and the disease state 1, and we all lost. Come, let's celebrate the life that was. And that's really where we need to be. Because we don't hide when someone has a heart attack. We don't hide when they die of cancer. We should not hide when someone dies from suicide.